The Book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, the Covenant Tablet of Shabuwa, Chapter 7. And it came to pass that after these days Enoch began to be old, and the righteous were growing in their understanding of the meaning of life, and righteousness was becoming firmly established among all of them, and they were seen by both the Decadarchiy and the Eerkodeshiy to be powerful in their loving kindness. And it was seemingly becoming impossible for the evil one to make inroads among them, and there was almost no contact between Maween and Chavah and Anahiel after this decision. But the wicked were also getting stronger and more united in their wickedness, and repentance had no place among them, and any or all means of turning away from their evil seemed to be very distant indeed. And just as the inhabitants of Maween were determined to be righteous, the wicked were set upon their own course with equal determination. And even though the two societies were developing separately, they did not interact together. A fierce spiritual battle was forming between good and evil, over which one would prevail to set in place the purposes of creation. Yea, even the very purpose of the gift of life itself, for all mankind and creation, and it was called a war in heaven. And evil was developing in such a way that it thought that it could expand without anything to hold it back or limit the extent of it, and it became a very real possibility that evil could eliminate all the purposes of Anokeesed in creation and set in place forever the dreams and desires of bad. With all his filthy hosts, and heaven watched all this quietly with sadness and alarm. And it came to pass that I now began to view all this by Urim, with keen interest and a foreboding, and I began to see the origins of armies. And I was shocked at what the Eerkodeshiy felt as I viewed them, being aware of how it was unfolding, for they were completely taken aback when they saw that weapons used in hunting were now being used to hunt their fellow man. Before this time, such a thing had been unthinkable. And because the Eerkodeshiy are so much like Anokeesed, and they cannot anticipate evil, and nothing so horrendous had ever entered into their minds or hearts, and they were utterly aghast and very alarmed, and shudders rippled all across the earth. But they watched in their quiet wisdom, and waited patiently upon the Lord in whom they put their trust, and the temporal world felt its first earthquakes of sorrow. And it came to pass that with these developments, that the Council of the Eerkodeshiy met together at the edge of eternity, and they put one foot in Elda, and one over the edge of eternity, and they securely laid hold of the presence of Anokeesed there. And Abel looked upon him with pleading eyes, and she did not have to ask, for Anokeesed knew what she wanted before she spoke. And Anokeesed smiled, and he stretched forth his hand toward Motzah the lamb, and he said, "This is my beloved son, hear him." And Motzah enfolded the entire council with the arms of his living water, and he said, "I will help you. Come with me now, and I will show you the way forward." And all the concourse of heaven clung unto Motzah and followed after him over the edge of eternity, and in that moment he became the hero of heaven and the champion of the earth, and to all mankind, and his sure hand sustained all creation. And Motzah opened their eyes to see the way forward, and he assigned each of them their part in the task that lay ahead of them, and all the hosts of heaven were marshaled together in a great company of holiness. And had evil been able to behold it, they would have slunk away in despair. But they could not see the truth, and were ruled over by bad, in ignorance and fear, and they became subject to their shrinking souls. Now while all this was transpiring in heaven, the wicked among men were moving ahead with their evil plans. And they soon discovered that the children of Maween were not magic, as they had been told, and they were distraught and were compelled to make a new plan. And it was decided that they would multiply their slaves by utilizing the spoils of war, and it was particularly hard slavery, and the burden of it went far beyond hard labor and the loss of freedom, because they were enslaved by sorcerers, and they were governed by spiritual torment and fear, and they were cursed, and evil spells were put upon them, and their very souls were in bondage by an expression of an evil religion that had the capacity to reduce their view of themselves to be the real property of others. And the wicked played with their minds so they could not even contemplate escape. And it was amazing to me to see it, because the country was open and escape would seem to have been easy, but their victims went quietly to their sufferings. And with their many slaves, the wicked could now form raiding parties and small armies who could go forth to plunder. And before this period of history, people did not have time for such activities, because they all had to be diligent and labor to live and support themselves. But with slaves, their hunters could hunt men, and the booty was promised to them, and thus the satisfaction of possessions undergirded warfare, and armies were seen upon the land. And it came to pass that Enoch beheld the coming days of armies, and he knew that bad would set his sight upon the righteous. Everywhere they were to be found. And he grieved and declared that the righteous children of Anokeesed, who is the one who is loving kindness, would never use hunting weapons to hunt their fellow men. And he knew that the Eerkodeshiy would pine away in the depths of sorrow if ever any of them would consider doing so. And Enoch was now very old, and the threats from bad and his bands of evildoers seemed foreboding to him. And he and Edney were weary from all their labors among the people of Maween, and he had long since ceased to be a traveler, and many of his elders had passed away to walk in Eden, and their loss continued to be heavy upon him. So it was determined by the people that Enoch and Edney would take a short journey in order to rest themselves. And some youth scouted out the way to ensure they would be safe, and that band of youth deposited supplies with food in a cavity of a rock in a selected and secluded place to assist them in their provision, and they departed back again, meeting Enoch and Edney on the way. And being assured of their welfare, they left for home, and Enoch and Edney led on gently. And when they came to a large clearing and found themselves out in the open, they began to hear the sounds of sorrow that seemed to come from everywhere, and they were filled with alarm. And the two of them knelt to pray there in the open place. And after some moments they could tell that it was the earth that was crying out in distress. And they felt Abel to be in mourning, and she was crying out for a redeemer. And this was just at the time when Abel had placed one foot in Elda and the other in the edge of eternity, because of her feelings of dread and foreboding, and it is the only time I have ever seen the Eerkodeshiy afraid. And they felt Mount Maween sighing in distress because of the burden Motzah had upon him as he walked with mankind, and the wind was listening with alarm, and all the Eerkodeshiy in the whole panoramic view of Maween to the west fixed their anxious eyes upon Motzah and Enoch and Edney in the meadow. And it came to pass that the two of them put their hands upon the earth to comfort it. And then they espied a person approaching toward them from the west. And he was moving very slowly, and they immediately saw that it was Motzah. So they sat quietly and respectfully waited for him to approach. And when he arrived and sat down, Edney held his hands in hers to comfort him. For she saw his distress and agony of soul, and I saw that he was comforted. And after a while, Motzah asked them to enter into a task for him, and he instructed them and gave them the first of 4 instructions, so that they could divide the earth. And then he accompanied them to the cave, where their supplies were stored for them, and he gave them further instructions. Then he departed, and continued up unto the heights of Maween, so he could ponder alone with his father. And after that they received instructions 2 more times from Motzah, as has been recorded in the Book of Remembrance of Enoch, reference number 48. Instructions for dividing the earth, Book of Remembrance of Enoch, chapter 14, verse 30 to 35, 36 to 43, 55 to 81, 120 to 191, up to the word world, 195 to 222, and chapter 15, verse 61 to 96. And the earth was divided by a strong hand, so that the Eerkodeshiy and the righteous could preserve the desires of Anokeesed in creation. And the divisions of the earth were set in place to be in effect for the long duration. And this division had the effect to curtail any intentions those in Tawah had toward those in Maween. And in this way, man being the object of creation would not fail. And the people were separated completely, with both Maween and Tawah having a clear way, to develop independently according to the one they followed, even until what they would become came to a fullness. And it came to pass in the course of time that the people of Maween returned to Eden, and the people of Yashiyah were swept away in the flood. And the full account of these things has been written in the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers, and also the book of remembrance of Enoch. And before my eyes came a clearer understanding than I had known before, as I viewed these events once again. And with Urim I beheld the four mothers standing in authority. Reference number 49, book of remembrance of Enoch, chapter 15, verse 73 through 75. To declare where on the earth and in heaven the Eerkodeshiy and the Decadarchiy were to dwell. And they stood forth to assign them their dwelling places. And the four mothers assigned the Eerkodeshiy to live in places of light and in delightful circumstances. And the Decadarchiy were assigned places to dwell in darkness and in dreadful places of fear. And the power of the righteous in service to Motzah was so strong in dividing the earth that the Decadarchiy and the wicked of Tawah were obliged to gather themselves together to flee into the regions of the valleys of Yashiyah, where they were assigned by the mothers, and they felt urgent to do so. And they gathered there for 7 years before the flood burst forth upon them in that place. And I saw that all the mothers in creation gathered together with the four mothers of Maween in their task, and I saw the living spirits of mountains, who were the mothers of Abel, stood in strength with them, and the mountains were the mothers of hills, and also mothers among trees, insects, plants, animals, and clouds stood forth with them, and evil could not resist the power of the righteous and holy mothers of Maween. And just like a mother decides where everything goes in her home, all the holy mothers of the earth decided where every living spirit in creation was assigned to dwell, and heaven supported the mothers of Maween. And it was glorious before my eyes, and the wicked were compelled, even against their better judgment, to gather into the darkness, only to be hidden before the face of Anokeesed. And many who gathered there even had to leave their slaves behind. And I saw that the winds of fear swept over the lands of Tawah and Yashiyah, and every inhabitant felt it, both the slaves and the masters of Seku. And the wind proceeded out to blow over the Ariel sea. And the sea is a mother also, for she is the mother of all the water creatures and the fish, and also to all those who use her waters. And she turned the wind with the gentle instructions of a mother, who is herself the living water. And the winds obeyed their mother, and they turned to feel confidence. And the winds of fear for Tawah became the winds of confidence for Maween. And this is the sixth decision in the first great 70. And the Eerkodeshiy chose to protect the righteous and to walk in perfection of way with them. And the Decadarchiy chose armies and war and the feelings of despair, which lead to the corruption of way. And all the wicked desperately asserted themselves to remain in supreme control, so that they all must come together to determine just who was the greatest of them all, and who would be the grand and high master of Seku. And they feared that if they did not do so, all their way of life would be lost for them, and their dominance would be gone forever. And I saw that all was in chaos among those in Yashiyah. And the Decadarchiy chose despair, hatred, cold-heartedness, and cunning to use to ensure their dominance and the continuance of their power, and the Eerkodeshiy chose to abide with the congregation of peace, to safeguard the quality of the love of Anokeesed for all his children. So love always could reign supreme in creation, and they chose that righteousness and salvation would prevail to overcome evil, so that the earth could be born anew, with the presence of Motzah the Lamb. And after these things, I rested for a while from viewing the vision. And it came to pass that we once again came together to look with Urim, for the Spirit was urging me to look and to continue to record the vision, because the Lord had many things yet for me to see. And when the Urim was in place, a view of the Lord standing before me came immediately to my eyes, and I was aghast at the sight of it, and I was very alarmed, for I saw the Lord standing facing me, and he was in a hard struggle, with both his arms outstretched, desperately holding on to two things, trying to draw them together with his arms. And I could not speak for some moments, and finally I said, my, O Lord, what are you doing?" But he was not in a way to answer. So I looked, and Abel was at the edge of eternity, and I said to her, "What is he doing, Abel? What is he doing?" And she too was very distressed, and she said, "He has 1 foot in Elda, and 1 foot over the edge of eternity upon the waters. And with his right hand and arm he is clinging to Anokeesed, and with his left hand and arm he is desperately hanging on to the temporal world." And she looked on with much agitation, and now she is going to explain more to me, and she is turning to approach me, and after a while she grew more calm, and she gathered herself together. And she said to me, "There were 7 grandmothers during the first great 70 who came to the aid of Motzah the Lamb to assist him in his task of preparing the world of his father for the long duration after the flood. And they did so with perfect charity, being led by the Spirit in all their ways, even though they did not fully comprehend the full meaning of that which they were doing. And they assisted him by preparing the temporal world to have the means of clinging to him in all the ways of repentance that are recorded in the book of remembrance of our ancient grandmothers. And in this way, the righteous could cling to him more fully to strengthen him, thus allowing him to persevere in securing the desires of his Father for creation over the long duration. But now I must sadly inform you that at the same time there have been 7 grandfathers who also lived during the first great 70, and in their vile wickedness they have come to the aid of Bad and all his company, and they have intended to wrench away from Motzah and hide from mankind the feelings of Anokeesed in the temporal world, so that they can fully use the earth for their evil purposes, and to do away with any influence of the loving kindness of Anokeesed upon the earth. And they intend to replace mankind as the objects of creation with their Decadarchiy, who are their false gods, because their gods share all their evil desires with them. And at this very moment they are approaching to accomplish it, and Motzah can barely hang on. And I looked upon the Lord with wonder and amazement, and Abel was there with him. And in my heart I said to her, "How can this be so?" And she said, "Look now with me." And she pointed toward the edge of eternity. And I turned to look, and as if what I was seeing with the struggle of the Lord was not enough, what came then before my eyes was terrible indeed. For I saw a man named Kahee, reference number 50, Strong's Concordance number 3576 and 3577, who is the elder of Yaatsekawd, and the first of the 7 grandfathers, who became the father of Kahee, the wicked. And before me was a vile and wicked old man, and he was misshapen and bent over, and the name Kahee means one who sets permanent lies in place never to be removed, and he is a master of deceit. And he set in place defiance to the voices of thunder, and his spirit is twisted like his body. And I wanted to turn my eyes away from looking at him, but I could not. And he has 3 names. Motzah calls him Kahee, and the Eerkodeshiy call him Melchizedek, which means "my king is wickedness." and men call him Abra, because he is known as the father of evil. And he is the first of the 7 grandfathers to come to the aid of bad. And he is his primary helper, and all the Decadarchiy dote on him. And he has a carefully laid out plan to establish a sure and lasting foundation for evil that will extend far into the future. And by this wicked man, bad fully intends to prosper among mankind with his lies, until he raises up on high in the end of days, like unto Anokeesed himself, but we know that his wishes are in vain. And I saw that the great lies that Kazab is establishing are that only the pursuit of the satisfaction of possessions can bring success and true happiness and pleasure. And it is only with the accumulation of wealth that mankind can be fulfilled in their lives and be seen by others to be honored. And I saw that this evil was hiding the underlying intentions of bad, and that was for these lies to result in the few to control the many, with kings and rulers, all during the course of the earth. And in this way the satisfaction of domination would be assured for them by Kazab, and thus nations and governments were born, and bad relished in his prospects for dominance. And I see Kazab with an evil fire that has many colored flames, and he is using the element of wickedness over and over, attempting to establish his evil, and my soul shuddered at the sight. And he is deep in the recesses of a cave, and his vile chanting echoes in the earth, and brings dread to the soul of it, and to the spirits of life in the Eerkodeshiy, and the sounds of death Cain in their fullness. Somehow I wondered if I would ever see such a man before the flood, for my instincts told me that somewhere during this time, one like him had to exist upon the earth. And I could see that the effect of the city of Enoch, son of Kenneh, was to slowly draw the people into becoming dependent upon him. And Enoch told them that he would take care of them, and he would gather stout men to protect them. And in return they must submit to him and give him all his required needs from out of their possessions and harvest, and also do him great and high honor. And by Enoch, the 2nd grandfather, declared that all the land round about was his and belonged to him. And if they would plant and gather for him, he would give them their needs. And for the first time upon the earth, one person began to work for another person, so they could receive their wages of provision. And the sorrowful eyes of Anokeesed began to see the poor upon the earth, and those who displeased Enoch received less than their neighbors. And Enoch gained the satisfaction of dominance when the people became urgent to please him, and he relished the title of chief of what would later come to be called a nation. And I saw that Enoch began to collect people to his city who were destitute or abandoned by others, and dependence and oppression grew, insomuch that he had to gain the assistance of those who pleased him the most, so he could control the people and find the time of leisure for himself. And thus Enoch built upon the foundation laid by Kazab. And it was plain to me as I viewed these things that what began with the city of Enoch has continued on down even to this very day. And bad was able to see his kingdom expand with a sure foothold, and his host in hell rejoiced with him, and the sounds of death resounded in Yashiyah and Tawah. And I saw that his son Irad, the 3rd of the 7 grandfathers, was the principal one to rule with him over the people. And in order to expand their ability to protect and dominate the people, Irad established and defined slavery. And for the first time upon the earth, Anokeesed had his burden of grief include that the lives of men could be seen to have so little value. And the children of Anokeesed who were slaves were said to belong to someone else. And in this way they forcibly took his children away from him. And tears fell in heaven at the edge of eternity. And Motzah hung on for dear life in the face of slavery. And for the first time the abundant rain upon the earth was the mourning tears of Anokeesed. And the denial of the value of human life burst forth like the wave of filthy water. And all the Eerkodeshiy wept also at their loss and their lofty expectations, for the fulfillment of the visions of the souls of men, who are the objects of creation, and whose spirit Motzah brought inside them to reside there together with him and his father Anokeesed, and the definitions in creation. But now there could be seen slaveholders upon the earth with empty souls, and divisions began to be seen in the land. And I saw how the works of Irad built upon the foundation his father Enoch had laid, and the forces of bad began to be enlarged. And the denial of the worth of human life burst forth like a cloud of poisonous smoke, and it sickened all the Eerkodeshiy. And Kohath, the fourth of the 7 grandfathers, who had Kazab for a father, also set his hand to come to the aid of bad. And as we have seen, he spied out the land of Maween, to discover how to enlarge and empower the people of bad, insomuch that they may be strengthened in their pursuit of the satisfaction of dominance. And his intentions were to oppress the righteous by the use of the element of wickedness. And it came to pass that I began to see spiritual warfare grow rapidly in its intensity among the wicked, and soon every man was against his neighbor, and each one sought to find some element of wickedness, more powerful and effective than his fellow, to bring harm and destruction upon his enemies. And in this way a strange thing began to emerge in the lands of Tawah, and it was that secrecy became essential for their survival, and darkness was seen to be valuable, and the companion of the occultists, and all became chaos among the wicked. And there were cries in the night, and secret burials to hide the success of their enemies from them. And I saw that fear and dread burst forth to cover the land, and the wicked clung to their weapons and to their elements of wickedness. And Kohath built upon the foundation of Irad, and the Eerkodeshiy named him Kohath the wicked, which is said Kohatholah. Reference number 51, Strong's Concordance, number 5766/5930 and 6955. The one who is allied to bad, but Motzah called him Zamam. Reference number 52, Strong's Concordance number 2162, the plotter. And bad, along with his band, now had many terrible feelings to feed upon like vultures from among the wicked, and he and all his hosts were determined to see that their source of delight in these things would continue, unchecked before their faces for a long duration. And I saw that the intensity of the pursuit of dominance grew in the urgency of it among the wicked, with every step of progress the righteous made in their walk with Anokeesed. And I saw plainly that all the Decadarchiy were smitten with envy and jealousy over the dedication and growing strength the people of Maween had from Anokeesed. And now comes the 5th wicked grandfather, Mahuyael. And it was he who discovered in the use of the element of wickedness that by combining slavery with fornication, he could chant and speak dark sentences to magnify lust among the wicked, in order to entice the wicked followers who dwelt in the city to view the obtaining of the fulfillment of their lust upon women by conquest, to be a satisfaction of dominance. And the fornications became an integral part of their acts in darkness, and it was first used among the slaves, and then among anyone they could find. And Mahuyael established and defined rape, and fornication, and adultery, and whoredoms, to be used to enlarge the appeal of the pursuit of the satisfaction of dominance in warfare. And in his practice of these devices, he was stricken with a loathsome sickness, and he and Zillah passed away in agony, and the degradation of women spread out among the wicked like the stench of the waters of hopelessness, and men with no conscience sought the conquest of human souls. And all the Eerkodeshiy round about wrung their hands with despair, and soft sounds of sobbing in the night could be heard coming from the trees both in heaven and upon the earth. And as if all this was not evil enough, the son of Kohath named Gad had a son named Gadad. Reference number 53, Strong's Concordance number 1413 and 1464, who was the sixth of the seven grandfathers, and he established armies and defined racial supremacy, and he built upon the foundation of slavery. And every man of war was as though he was a slave to violence, and the lives of their enemies held no value to those who ruled over them and set them on their errands of death. And they were unruly and savage one towards the other, with no discipline or consideration for one another, or those who they considered to be inferior. And pride and boasting began to bring a loathsome new sound of death into the ears of the grieving Eerkodeshiy, and Gadad conditioned the men to be unfeeling toward their enemies, and he promised them the spoils of war, and their hearts were cold and empty. And it came to pass that Gadad discovered that he had to teach the men of war to have consideration for one another while in the midst of conflict, so there could be stability among them. And Bad saw that he and his hosts now had the assurance of dominance, so that all he desired to feed on would remain before his face for a long duration upon the earth, even until the end of days, and this being ensured by the acts of the armies of the wicked. And therefore Bad turned all his attention towards Tawah and Heliah, because there was not one person in Maween who would hurt another person or pursue them for harm, or even for disadvantage, or look upon any of their fellows with lust or disdain. And it came to pass that as Abel was bringing all these things before my eyes, I was now to view the last of the seven grandfathers among the wicked who came to the aid of Bad, and that man was Lamech. And he brought forth the Nephilim, being carefully instructed by Bad and all his band. And all the Decadarchiy were anxious to join with women in Tawah, so that they could beget children. And all of this wickedness was now before my eyes. And I cried out in despair and said, O Abel, in light of all these things, what is it to be done for our Motzah? Please, what is to be done to help poor Motzah? And another rock of Abel was standing by, and this new rock spoke and said, I am one who has been sent to fetch you by the altar of Yaatsekawd and Chavah, even the rock of Ariel. Come with me. And my spirit began to move and followed her. And I began to look about to see if I could know where we were going. And in a little while, I thought I could see Mount Mahuya in the distance. And on the side of the mountain, we are descending toward an open meadow. And in the distance, I see three people sitting on the ground. And as we approach, I can see it is Enoch and Edney sitting together with the Lord, as we have seen. And all the Eerkodeshiy are hovering around them. And an extremely serious mood was upon them all. And I quietly viewed these things from outside their presence, to not interrupt them. For the Eerkodeshiy did not miss a word that Motzah spoke to them, and I could feel their power and determination as they hung on his every word. And when Motzah was done, he bid Enoch and Edney well, and he blessed them and departed. And as he went, he instructed some among the Eerkodeshiy to accompany them, in order to protect them from Bad and his forces of evil, through the process of receiving all their periods of instruction to divide the earth. And I know now that this mighty and strong force went with them when they traveled into Tawah to see their son Methuselah. And it was the Eerkodeshiy who carefully guided them to turn northward, so that Motzah could instruct them a third time concerning the divisions of the earth. And they did this in order to avoid their being overtaken and destroyed by the followers of Methuselah, and during that time they were probably the most watched over people on the earth. And now I knew full well that dividing the earth is what is going to be done to assist Motzah and the gentle winds and the quiet mountains with the peaceful hills were stout defenders of their Creator, and my heart was made glad with the knowledge of the dividing of the earth. And it came to pass that after these things I thought rejoicing thoughts for only a moment, and again my spirit was buffeted with the excesses of both deep despair and the exhilaration of praisings. And I tried to settle my mind when I saw that the Abel who came for me was in fact the rock with the cavity in it, where Enoch and Edney spent the night when Enoch received his second instructions from the Lord. And at that moment, everything changed again. And I began to see another cave, and a day long before the time of the dividing of the earth, and Enoch, the seventh from Yaatsekawd, was entering into the cave. And I could tell I had seen this scene before. And it was where he went west of the Ariel Sea, when he was grieving over the theft of the children of Kodesh, who were set upon by the brigands of Chavah, as they migrated into Maween, down from the high places of the east. And Enoch went into the cave to rest, and to ponder upon what must be done to protect the tender people of Kodesh. And after he sat down, he began to hear voices from deep inside the cave, and the rocks of Abel listened with him, and he heard the voice of a man, who we know now was named Chavah. And he was gathered there with his fellows, and Enoch heard vile rejoicings and laughter over the celebration of the capture of the children of Kodesh. And I am able to see far back into the cave where Enoch is looking, and in the flickering light of a strange fire, I see the terrible figure of Chavah. And he is informing his fellows that his army is now trained and poised to sweep into Maween to subjugate the people. And their hunting weapons are at the ready, and they are waiting in a valley to the northwest of the Ariel Sea to receive their instructions. And if they can get along together and are willing to take instructions from one another, then they may succeed. And Enoch is listening carefully to their plans, and he is very distraught. And it came to pass that I see him again high up upon the mountain, and he looks very prepared and determined for what he is about to do. And I cannot tell if time has passed or not, but now he has his staff, and preparations are made as he assembles wood before an altar. And by how he carries himself, he looks very confident in the task at hand, and he is praying prayers of protection for his people. And I see that he has a sacred fire upon his altar, and he is sending his prayers to Anokeesed with the smoke from the altar. And I see he is fanning the smoke upward using some kind of branch that has small leaves, and all the Eerkodeshiy are attentive, and they hang on his every word. And in the heat of the day, the Spirit of the Lord urges Enoch to hurry down from the mountain, and Enoch departs with haste. And by the time he arrives in the foothills, the mountain gives a huge heaving shake, and there is a great earthquake, and the dust rises up into the high places, and a large cloud before the face of the army of Chavah. And I did not see it, but I know that Chavah and all his fellows are buried in the cave, so that their bones will never be seen again during the course of the earth, and no one will ever have to think of them again. And the army of Chavah appears to be small, and they are boisterous and rude before the God of heaven. And when the earth shook, they fled in much confusion, and they began to fight among themselves. And the Spirit said to me that they were disbanded, never to join together again, having lost all their leadership. And it came to pass that after seeing all these hard sights, I began to reflect on where the course of the earth would go in relation to the burden of Motzah the Lamb. And I began to view Lamech once again, and he is the last of the seven of those who came to the aid of bad. And Lamech was perhaps the one whose influence resulted in the rise of wickedness to such an extreme level that Anokeesed began to wonder if he had done the right thing in creating all the sons of men and the earth, which was to be their dwelling place. And the descent of wickedness into the abyss that followed that which Lamech established would be described as the reason Anokeesed repented that he had made all those who dwelt in Yahawahshi. For they came to be in a condition that they were beyond repentance, and they commandeered creation to use for their own ends. And I know that at the end of days, just before the Lord emerges out from his dwelling place to reveal his holy arm to all the nations, wickedness will once again descend to that level, and the earth will be destroyed by fire. And now I see Lamech once again, and what came before my eyes was information that allowed us to understand some of the processes the wicked went through to obtain the Nephilim. And it is this development of the Nephilim that tipped the balance, and the flood was assured. and the grief in heaven is beyond what my poor heart can endure to feel or describe at this time. And I am forbidden to reveal how they accomplished conceiving their Nephilim. Now Lamech stumbled upon the way that the Decadarchiy could conceive children among the women of the earth, who were subject to the wicked and bad learned from him, and the first Nephilim child was a normal human-looking child, but it had been given the spirit of a big cat to live in a human body, and it was vicious from the time it was little, and it could not be controlled starting at a very early age. And the child would scratch and bite and torment Zillah, the wife of Lamech, and she would find it lying in wait for her to attack her by surprise. And I saw that as the child grew older, it became very strong. And one day Lamech found Zillah injured and nearly dead. But Lamech wanted the child, even though it was becoming impossible to take the child with him on the hunt. And it became unworkable to leave it home. And the Nephilim child was very demanding upon them for provisions. And life in those days was such that each and every person had to contribute to their ability to sustain themselves to find provisions, and they could not allow the stout young hunters to spend their days protecting others from the Nephilim child. Finally, life with the child with a lion-like spirit became so unbearable that Lamech killed it with his Saku knife in an act of desperation in the heat of his anger. And that turn of events brought about entirely unexpected conditions for Lamech and Zillah, for word was spread abroad that Lamech had such a child, and everyone was afraid to come near their encampment to attack him, for fear of being attacked themselves by what was commonly thought to be a supernatural monster. And Lamech tried to hide that he had slain the child because it had the effect of protecting his camp, and the news of the death of his Nephilim opened him up to attack from his fellows, who were envious of him for his knife. And all the others who vied to become a master of Saku wanted desperately to know how to conceive their own Nephilim children, and the wicked began to hunt Lamech in order to take his life, because they did not want him to replace Kazab, for there were others who wanted the honor of the position of dominance held by Kazab. But Lamech had the knife, and the very knife that had been used to murder his child, and it became necessary for Lamech to abandon Zillah, only to become a fugitive and flee for his life. Mahuyael took in Zillah, and he learned from her how a Nephilim child might be conceived, and in this way Mahuyael became the real force before he died that allowed the rise of the use of Nephilim, and was the primary one responsible for the Nephilim wars. And it came to pass that the news spread among the wicked concerning how to conceive such a child, and one who was prominent among them did so, and his name was Zeeb, reference number 54, Strong's Concordance, number 2062. And Zeeb conceived a Nephilim child with the wife of a defeated enemy, just for the purpose of tracking down Lamech, for most of all they wanted his knife. And this Nephilim was a child that had the spirit of a wolf, and its spirit was such that it would lay claim to the possessions of others, and it marked its territory. And it came to pass that it began to lay claim to the possessions of others within their settlement. And such behavior was very troubling to those who earnestly sought after the satisfaction of possessions. And this Nephilim also could not be controlled, and it went awry, and it laid claim to the possessions of Zeeb, and would not allow him or his family into their dwelling place. And it ate all their food put by for the winter. And the people there were compelled to abandon their encampment, and it was so fast and fierce that it could not be driven away. And the inhabitants of Tawah began to move away before it, leaving it no provisions. And the Nephilim was about 16 years old, and it roamed around Tawah until it died of starvation. And I saw that the conception of Nephilim became more and more deliberate, and plans were laid, and provision was made. So the spirit of the Nephilim creatures was carefully selected to suit a definite purpose. And the wicked learned their lessons from those who had gone before them. And it came to pass that the accumulation of wealth and the satisfaction of possessions became the presiding spirit in Tawah and Heliyah, and it was all the people sought after. And at this time, a knowledge of life after death was becoming widespread and well accepted, and it was determined that they needed a Nephilim that would assure them that they would continue to have their desires of dominance and their coveted possessions in the next life. And they intended to assure themselves that this could be accomplished, and they could not tell that they were being deceived by bad, because the foundations of Kazab seemed so firmly laid. And some were familiar with the activities of falcons, and they were aware of when they would lay hold of their prey and carry it away to the place they desired for it. And it was decided that they would conceive a Nephilim, who had the spirit of a falcon. And when someone died, it would take up their spirit and carry it into the next life and deposit it in a place where their possessions and dominance could follow with them. And we know such a belief was vain and false. And they began to train up their Nephilim to be tame, and they were brought into play in preparing the dead for burial. And in this conspiring way, those who sought for such an afterlife laid by wealth to be given to the owner of this Nephilim upon their death. And the masters of this Nephilim became very wealthy and had an abundance of possessions and much sway over the people. And this was the seventh decision in the first great 70 by the Decadarchiy. And so it went. And by the time of the flood, there was or had been some 40 different Nephilim, but not all at the same time. And I began to understand why I was seeing all this, and it was to prepare the knowledge of the circumstances leading up to the flood and the establishment of Shabuwa by the hand of Melchizedek. And now I could see the determination needed in accomplishing the division of the earth. And I now understand that the wicked who supported bad sought to bring about the possibility that a new kind of evil could come into being that could not be impeded by any act of the righteous. And they nearly accomplished it, for there seemed to be no defense against the Nephilim among the wicked or the righteous. And 4 of the Nephilim spirits remained upon the earth after the flood, only to become the demons of the earth. And only men of service can cast them out by acts of righteousness and by the authority of Elda. But Anokeesed made answer with the division of the earth, and he set in place the 24 conditions which evil cannot penetrate, and their protections could be utilized by men of service to dispel evil, and threats made by the wicked against righteous communities, both before the flood in ancient times and before the arm of the Lord in the last days. And in this way the division of the earth firmed up the grip of Motzah's left hand and arm on the temporal world, to ensure that it would continue to express the desires Anokeesed has for his children in creation, so that his loving kindness could not be hidden. And the division of the earth was very simple, because of the established voices coming from the 4 directions, and because the directions could now be conceived of through the eyes of Anokeesed, and because of the power of the 24 conditions, and because of the assigned dwelling places given to both the Eerkodeshiy and the Decadarchiy, the spirit and presence of Anokeesed was brought into the life of every person who chose the living water to be openly felt and enjoyed by them. And the 24 conditions are straight from Elda, and they are overseen by the Council of the Eerkodeshiy, and they are safeguarded and preserved by them, and heralded and taught by them to all the righteous during the times of strength of the Nephilim of tribulation times. And because the 24 conditions are beyond the reach of sin and wickedness, there is nothing the wicked can do to turn them to be subject to the use of the element of wickedness. So listen carefully, because what is being spoken of is coming from the directions as Anokeesed sees them, according to the careful instructions in dividing the earth. And that which is being spoken by the 4 quarters of the earth can penetrate into the hearts of the righteous unimpeded by evil. And because the 4 directions constitute the whole, in this way there is no room left for the voices of evil to come from the directions, and the voices of evil are thus destined to be erratic and fragmented, and they dissipate easily, having no foundation in the truth of Anokeesed, when their deceptions are exposed to the light of the Lord. And in this way, the division of the earth permanently established Anokeesed to be shown to be in the midst of all things, and in the availability of him in the hearts of the righteous, and the 24 conditions are close friends with the Eerkodeshiy. And I see that all throughout the land of Maween, the righteous are implementing the levels of urgency to great effect. And during the times immediately following the dividing of the earth, a great company of listeners were sent out to instruct all the righteous in the use of the levels of urgency. And upon learning all these things concerning how to use the levels of urgency, the people shifted their dwelling places so there could be men of Abara and their families living in many places throughout the land, in order to afford protection for all the people. Before this time, the men of that order of service were mostly living in Nod and Anak. And so the people adjusted to their need for protection, and all knew their role in the levels of urgency. And it is imperative that in the end of days, this knowledge come to the people of the Lord throughout the whole earth, so that they may know how to set in place the protections of the levels of urgency. And bad will be wroth, because he cannot penetrate into the presence of Anokeesed. And with these things, the council of the Eerkodeshiy took their foot out of Elda, and they went wholly into the temporal world, being determined to live together with the righteous, and suffer together with them, and worship together with them, and work together with them, and to rejoice together with them. And for the first time since Eden, the Eerkodeshiy were able to fully throw their lot into the temporal world with mankind, come what may, and all the dissipated vestiges of Eden were now the primary consideration of the Eerkodeshiy. And Motzah, the lamb, now meant something new to them, and all creation beheld with clear comprehension the deep significance of their Creator and our Redeemer. And the council of the Eerkodeshiy rehearsed all these things to their myriad followers in creation. And thus began the long preparation for the establishment of the religion of Shabuwa by Melchizedek. And all this is the background and the conditions present on the earth at the time little baby Melchizedek arrived in the world. And the vision was hard to see, for the dreariness of the sight of the evildoers before the flood. So we rested some few days before we took up again. And it came to pass that when we were once again assembled to look, my first view was to see large rocks with a little dwelling, built up against the face of a small outcropping. But this time everything was happy, and all creation before my eyes was confident and resilient against evil in all they felt. And all the Eerkodeshiy were moving about, happily engaged in their gift of life, and they were celebrating their bonding with the righteous. And the Eerkodeshiy, together with the people of this encampment before my eyes, are all prosperous together and happily attached to the circumstances of their lives. And the contrast between what we had just seen about the burden of Motzah was startling indeed, because I had just come from seeing the Eerkodeshiy being afraid and putting one foot in Elda and the other in the water at the edge of eternity, as if they were in retreat from the temporal world. And the vision of the burden of Motzah, as he was trying for all he was worth to keep Anokeesed openly attached to the temporal world, was very sobering for us all. But now I am seeing what appears to be another world, and I exclaimed, "O Lord, where is this place? How came this delightful change in creation, that happiness abounds?" And I said, "Abel, how can you be so happy with your companions and with the righteous people living here in this settlement?" And I can see that she is delighted to hover over the dwelling made up against the rocks of the cliff as though it is her treasure. And she answered and said, "This is the encampment of Rak and Baith, who are the parents of Imzara, who is the mother of Melchizedek." And the spirit of Abel came close to me, and I know she is going to instruct me. And she said, "You have seen creation through the eyes of the brother of Jared, and you have seen creation through the eyes of Enoch. And now you have seen creation through our eyes, and we are called the angels of heaven. Now I will show you what we have gone through, in our transition from Elda into the temporal world, and indeed what even the Decadarchiy have experienced during this time when they also entered creation in Eden, only to move out into the temporal world. And Anokeesed desires that I instruct you in all these matters, so the righteous can know how to rightly divide the powers upon the earth that affect their lives in the end of days. From the moment Anokeesed declared that he wanted eternity to have an edge or a boundary, the first decree of creation came fully into effect. And from that moment of beginning, Anokeesed found his fatherhood, and the Council of the Eerkodeshiy saw and felt that the changes that came over him, seeing that the one who knows all things could now ask questions and could seek the advice of others, were indeed generating a force that would become a man before him, who he would call his son. And Anokeesed found his fatherhood there at the edge of eternity, and we, Eerkodeshiy, had never thought of him as father before. And so he, as a father, created all the spirits of life in creation that would ever live upon the earth and in heaven. And each and every spirit of life, whether it be a man or a tree or a cloud or a mountain, yea, even all the host of men and the multitudes of the watchers of heaven are indeed his children. But only the children of men are in his image and are given a fullness of agency that can endure for all the times of their lives, while our agency ends with the completion of the first great 70 and the intervention of the agency by the man that he became, as the man Motzah, the Lamb, has given him the identity of father. And all the spirits of life he created were good, yea, even all the spirits of mankind, and of all the spirits of life, both in heaven and upon the earth, were good and excellent in his sight. And this was before 1/3 of the watchers in heaven fell away. And the spirit of Anokeesed was there in all that existed, and it was good. And his presence was come to reside there, because his son put him there to be immovable in each living thing. But his presence there could be denied by the use of agency, and it could be hidden, but it could not be removed by those that fell away. And Anokeesed joyed in his rich companionship with all his children, and those who were in his image were the object of creation, and who all the other spirits of life were created for. And the spirits of life in creation were to be their home in rich fellowship, to hold them and sustain them in all things with love. And Motzah, the living water, who goes out with us to bless us with the fullness of the gift of life, by way of his marvelous grace and forgiveness, created all the forms element had taken, for all those spirits to live in perfect purity and holiness. And he and our first parents entered into creation as he does with all of you and your visions. And Eden was complete in utter perfection, with both man and Motzah, together with Anokeesed, and all the spirits of life, living together in every entity in creation. And Eden became complete with the marriage of our first parents, and even with the birth of their child Kenneh in Eden. Still, no sin or evil were to be seen before the face of Anokeesed in Eden. And everything in this vast realm of perfection was where it belonged, and doing what it was created to do. Yea, all the rocks in the river Simcha were where our Creator put them, and they were only feeling his feelings, and busy loving with his love, and seeing with his eyes all they surveyed. And they were all utterly pure in all their relationships with the water, the hills, fish, and all those who drank from the water, or who dwelt depending on it for their gift of life. And everyone was happy and content, and likewise was all of Eden. But bad, the devil who calls himself Semihaza, was not happy nor content, and he was not where Motzah put him, because he was the son of a comet, and he felt feelings that were alien to the loving kindness of Anokeesed. And after he entered Eden, he was very alone and isolated, and afraid and unsure of himself, and he did not know our first parents, for he chose that their visions of created purpose would not reside in him. And because he intruded into Eden on his own, and not in response to Motzah the Creator. He did not allow the spirit of Motzah the Lamb to have a place in his heart. So here was a spirit in Eden that was empty of everything Eden was created to be, and he could not discern the object of the creation of Anokeesed, and he was envious of the happiness of all the rocks in Eden, and he was filled with despising, and he could not speak any of the languages of our assembly. But most of all, he did not know how to love in the midst of an infinite expression of love, or to feel love in return. And out of this arose separateness, and for the very first time in creation came the spirit of rebellion and stubbornness, and all of us were afraid to try to speak to him. And Anokeesed did not urge us to approach him, and he became angry, because he could not move from his place on the hillside, and he tried desperately for his spirit to lift up and find companionship, but no one would join with him in even one of his feelings, because his lips blasphemed Anokeesed. And Bad, as we call him, who would grow to be the very devil himself, found that he could learn what the vision of those around him was, and he could twist it a little into a lie, and find some few of the spirits of the rocks of Eden who would listen to him. And in this way he became the father of lies, and his spirit could grow to move around and mingle with the spirits of those who responded to him. And his spirit began to move away from the hillside, and thus Bad rebelled against the truth and against loving kindness. And in this way, Bad began to get a tiny foothold among the rocks of Eden with his lies, in the midst of the perfection of Eden. But he found himself at a huge disadvantage to gain any sway in Eden. For when Yaatsekawd and Chavah sinned before Bad, and those who followed his rebellions even knew what that meant, they were forgiven and baptized in the brook of the meadow. And it came to pass that after they sinned, our first parents left Eden to dwell here in our temporal world. And all of us, Eerkodeshiy, followed out of Eden with them, because they were our loved ones, and we knew they were the objects of our creation, they being made in the image of Anokeesed, and we followed them with trepidation, out between the oaks of Pathak, going into the unknown, but also with a firm and immovable love for them, and a sense of our duty to care for them and be their new home in whatever manner our new circumstances would present to us. And we knew by that time what we were to do for them, for we would feed and clothe them and afford them all the joys of life. And our only resource was our own love for them, and we could all consult together in this matter, because all of us only spoke the languages of love, and we had the spirit of our Creator Motzah inside us to guide us, and we cherished, like a treasure, a knowledge of what Anokeesed had created them to be, as a sure anchor to bind us tightly to our purpose, and giving them every opportunity to accomplish their purpose in him, and it is called their vision of created purpose. But Bad was cast out of Eden into yet another world that was unknown to him, and he was disheveled and displaced, and Bad was nearly completely overcome, but was hanging on by a tiny thread. And that thread was that Chavah did not feel forgiven, and when Motzah came along to meet them at their rock of Ariel, she felt forgiven, and the thread was clipped, and Bad was left with nothing. And at this time he could have chosen to repent and to join with us, but he was stubborn in his rebellion, and he continually searched about for even a small feeling that would comfort him in his desires for glory, so he could feed upon it. And the obstinacy of little Kenneh when he stomped his foot at being asked to help put the sheep away comes to mind as such a moment, or the tiny hint of the satisfaction of possessions felt by Awan when she stole the wedding rye of her mother, was another small foothold for Bad to feed upon. And so Ben Elam the seer, this is the situation we all found ourselves in upon our moving out of Eden. And the temporal world for us was like a family moving into a new home in a foreign land, where everything is out of place and nobody knows the plan, and nobody had the vision of what life in a temporal world should be like. Neither Yaatsekawd and Chavah nor any of us Eerkodeshiy, nor any who were beginning to want to be the Decadarchiy at that time. But we soon learned how to be an effective home of love for our charges, and we all, even every one of us, entered into our task with the greatest diligence and delight. And with the murder of Matteniah by his brother using sorcery, the domain of bad found a sure foothold. And he laid hold of his new-found reins of power, and sorcery became the center of his ways, and lies became his means of finding companionship in his views of life, and the sounds of death became his signal to move out, to reinforce his dominance, and he was filled with delight upon hearing the sounds of death, and to him it was like the stench that draws vultures to their carcass to feed. And it came to pass that in the midst of these conditions, the Lord Motzah began calling on Enoch to bring divisions in order to show a clear contrast between good and evil, between the sanctity of marriage and fornications, between purity and corruption, between nourishing ministry and the oppression of traditions, between the sweet and the bitter, and also between all of us who are the watchers of holiness and the fallen bullies who are the Decadarchiy. So Enoch divided the sons of heaven, and thus exposed the evil of the enemy of our souls, and brought the good to light, and he divided the sons of men, to set the marker of the sanctity of marriage, to show us who were our own in holiness. And in this way he showed forth the corruptions of fornication. And he divided the waters so everyone and all of us could know that in the end we must be accountable to Anokeesed for our use of agency. And he divided the authority of Elda to separate it from all other authority, so that a complete expression of the loving kindness of Anokeesed would always be found upon the earth, and so that through all the ages of the earth we could all know that with Anokeesed there is no wrathfulness, jealousy, nor hatred or vengeance. But still, with all of the divisions of Enoch, the earth was still not an organized place, nor a sure competent home for us. There was still no absolute direction, forming a life plan of peace and tranquility for mankind. It was like a large family moving into a new home, and where you were to sleep, there was nothing to sleep with, and where food was prepared, there was nothing to eat on or cook with, and all of your clothing was just laying around in big piles. And in the midst of this haphazard and spontaneous traditional condition arose a helping and healing force, and it was our dear and ancient grandmothers, and they began to use the divisions of Enoch to set in place the knowledge and skills needed to make choices between the contrast that Enoch showed forth in his divisions, and they brought to the world a sense that life need not be random and separate, but continuity and intelligence could be found. But be it also known that at the same time, Bad had 7 evil grandfathers who could rise up to counteract this progress in holiness, because Bad saw the exposure of evil to be threatening him and his domain. And all his evil was brewing beneath the surface and was kept secret, and a hidden subtlety lying in wait for the unsuspecting world of the righteous, because the righteous were like Anokeesed, and they could not anticipate evil, and they were innocent, and only could assume the best of all things in their lives. And what the wicked grandfathers were achieving was lying in wait for the world of love. But because we, Eerkodeshiy, lived with both the righteous and the wicked, we knew and saw that which was coming. And dear one, at this point we arrive at the vision you saw, where we of the Council of the Eerkodeshiy felt such alarm that we began to wonder if we should retreat back into Elda, and we all put one foot there when we saw Motzah do it. And Motzah was hanging on for all he was worth, trying to keep the presence of his father connected to creation in the temporal world so it could continue to be openly felt and interacted with, and he was tasked with securing the purposes of his father in creation so they could not be stolen away by Bad and all his evil host. And at this point, the earth was still like a home in disarray, and the 4 directions were not yet established because only the east was identified in Elda, and righteousness was strong but elusive, and wickedness could not be easily identified by the righteous, and the righteous were not sure how they must act in order to avoid evil. And all these conditions were in place on the earth among us and mankind, because the second decree of creation was not yet put into full effect, and the force of that decree was not defined nor established upon the earth, and it had little bearing on creation, because only Motzah, Yaatsekawd, and Chavah had addressed any form of the second decree of creation by the intervention of the agency of man, for either the doings of creation or the affairs of salvation. And as I have shown you, Motzah went and instructed Enoch in how to divide the earth, and dividing the earth had the purpose of bringing the second decree of creation into full and everlasting effect. And the haphazard and scattered way that we all had been experiencing began to be influenced to find order by the intervention of the agencies of the righteous people of Enoch when they divided the earth. And order began to be shown forth in creation, and you will see that Bad was completely taken aback by these developments. And Enoch looked back, and he used 22 days as the element of righteousness. Reference number 55. Jubilees, chapter 2, line 15 and 11. Kahee, chapter 5, verse 94. Because of the 22 things that were created during the 6 days of creation, and the use of that particular element of righteousness had the effect of reaffirming the purpose of those 6 days of creation, and in effect, the second decree of creation began to be a force to set those purposes into permanency, and in this way Enoch laid hold of the beginnings of creation. And the last act of the wicked before the division of the earth was the murder of Yashiyah and Anahiel at the pool of heaven, and that tipped the scales, and the knowledge of it resulted in a great determination by Motzah and all of us to intervene to set the world in order in a final way by bringing the flood to the wicked and Shabuwa by the hand of Melchizedek. And the east was identified in Elda as the direction of new beginnings, and it was a foreshadow of how Motzah would view the directions, and a signal of the coming of Shabuwa. And what happened to Yashiyah and Anahiel was the foundation for the need to establish the levels of urgency, and this was because the Decadarchiy, along with their Nephilim, had denied them their new beginning, and migrating westward with their people. But Motzah met them at the pool of heaven, and took them back to Eden, and their new beginning took on a new dimension, and their new beginning was glorious for all of us to behold, and the richness of a resurrection will forever remain in place with man because of our lovely Redeemer. And we, Eerkodeshiy, witnessed a marvelous thing, and we were filled with joy almost to the point of being overcome, to behold the effects of dividing the earth. For by the wise instructions of Motzah, Enoch firmly established very specific forms of connecting the spirit and presence of Anokeesed into all the holy elements of creation, and the way in which he accomplished it was very special, because the holy presence there was established in such a way that for the duration of the earth, evil will find it impossible to hide it or force it into obscurity. And this is our view of what Enoch did, to irrevocably connect Anokeesed to our world, and he and his people are heroes to us. And the great change you have seen between viewing the burden of Motzah with 1 foot in Elda, and that which came before your eyes in viewing the little dwelling at the rocks of the encampment of Rock and Bariel, has all been brought about by the division of the earth. And Enoch and his people set in place the 4 directions of the earth and the orders of service, and carefully instructed them in the exact manner of what they were to speak to mankind all during the course of the earth. And the power of the element of righteousness used was such that each of the 4 directions became a living soul with the vision of created purpose of Motzah. And this was one of the doings of creation done by the intervention of the agency of man. That was decreed by Anokeesed in heaven. And it was established that the mountains of the earth would be that which is tasked with the watch care of the vision of the souls of the four directions, and they are diligent with that which they are entrusted. And Enoch and his people assigned us each to dwell in a direction, and that direction has become a treasured home for us. And we are always at the ready to receive instructions, to act from those positions, according to the second decree of creation, and we are intent to hold and preserve the spirit and presence of Anokeesed, where we live to be immovable. And Enoch and the married men of Arah expand our instructions from time to time, so that what we do will preside to prevail, and we resist any use of the directions for evil, and the wicked are hard-pressed to overcome us. And the intentions of bad and all his evil host is to bring an alternative definition of the truth. But because man defined the truth, and that definition was established in accordance with the second decree of creation, they cannot force their way, and they are left wanting, and their voices fade away like an unpleasant memory. And this is because the Lord was wise, and he had Enoch and his people decide for themselves what the truth would be. And there were discussions among the righteous during those 22 days, and they counseled together. And at first they wanted us, the Eerkodeshiy, to define the truth for them, but we withheld, and we said, the truth that we define can be denied by the Decadarchiy, because we cannot intervene with agency like man can, as required by the second decree of creation, and our voice in the matter can be overshadowed by them. And so the righteous in ardent prayer decided that they must find the definition of the truth with man, but the questions were, who would do it, and where would it come from? And Abel opened up before my eyes a view of the altar of the Asuba, where the river Badal entered the Ariel Sea. And I do not know if that altar spoke, but I could feel a revelation coming to the people while they were gathered around her. And the revelation was that the truth was as yet unspoken, but fully known and fully felt by our first parents. And it was decided that the purest expression of the truth was in the hearts and minds of our first parents in Eden, as they looked out at creation and walked with Anokeesed every day. And that which they felt together with him in all of those relationships was, in fact, the definition of the truth for all mankind with every people and period of time during the entire course of the earth. And Enoch knelt beside the altar and reminded it of what it felt when Yaatsekawd and Chavah sat there touching it during the time when he divided the sons of men according to the sanctity of marriage. Enoch reminded the altar that it was that very marriage that brought Eden to be complete. And since returning to Eden, which is the desired pathway for all the righteous, the view of Yaatsekawd and Chavah of the gift of life in all things will be the purest expression of the truth that will endure to greet us all when we return to Eden with Motzah the Lamb. And Enoch commissioned the altar of Asuba to safeguard that very truth for all time. And the altar said, I will hold that truth through all the ages of the earth, and by me it will be unassailable, for I am a rock of witness, and I have listened this day to all that has transpired here before Anokeesed and man. And Abel continued, and she said, every rock of Abel upon the earth expressed their determination to deny bad, to use them, to establish any other expression of eternal truth. And bad had to resort to the rocks of his domain for help. But they were hidden deep in the earth, away from the light of day, and their voices could not be heard until the wicked brought them forth into the world of light and into the lives of men. And their lives were cruel and blasphemed the love of Anokeesed. And Enoch was a prophet who diligently sought out how to protect the people of Anokeesed. And standing before Anokeesed, he established by a strong hand that men of Abara, down through the ages of the earth, could identify and define 24 conditions that occur among us, Eerkodeshiy, throughout the various places upon the earth that will be designated to bring a powerful witness of the presence of Anokeesed himself and his all-pervasive loving kindness into the hearts of the righteous. And those conditions could be used as a reliable means of protecting the righteous and their means of empowerment because each of the 24 of them will be charged to hold within themselves a specific truth about him that cannot be intruded upon by evil forces. And these 24 conditions have the capacity to draw compassion from Anokeesed for the righteous to the extent that all creation will push back against the denial of that truth. And in this way, they will shield the righteous from the effects of such denials. And thus Enoch joined the presence and spirit of Anokeesed to the earth in ways that cannot be erased. And he came directly to the aid of Motzah with his burden that you beheld at the edge of eternity. And Enoch established the covenant with Anokeesed himself, being the author of it, so that Motzah is the messenger of the covenant. And the evil powers that hate the covenant will be powerless to diminish it in the lives of those who choose to live by it with a sure determination, because Anokeesed is the author of it. And Enoch established that the men of Abarah could at any time pour the waters of sweetness. Reference number 56. Book of Remembrance of Enoch, chapter 10, verse 146 through 147. Upon the altars to remind all the watchers of heaven of the first great sevening, and to remind and strengthen all the forces of holiness of the pathway that they have chosen, to both urge us, Eerkodeshiy, on with vigor in our missions, and to remind the Decadarchiy of the shame of their corruption, and in effect cast them out from their strongholds. And little brother, it was in all these ways that the second decree of creation was brought into full effect, with the same power that it had in Eden. And it was all done by the intervention of the agency of the righteous. And like a mother and a father, bringing order to their home among the righteous, they magnify the wholesome and desirable and suppress the loathsome, and they relegate them back into their places of retreat. And in all these things the encampment of Rak and Barith that stood in the land of Tawah became secure with their protection, and we were all happy and rejoicing, as you saw with me and my companions. And it came to pass that Abel moved away from me and ended her instruction to me. And I saw that Bad and all his hosts were subdued by the division of the earth, and the valleys of Heliah became their abyss, like unto the high eastern waste places of Mahuya. And their day of recompense found them there with the flood. And with this we ended our session of seeing with the This concludes the Book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, the Covenant Tablet of Shabuwa, Chapter 7. Shalom.